Have you ever escaped a relationship that felt suffocating, thinking you were finally free, only to realize you were disappearing from your own life? No joy in the things that once felt familiar, no spark in the encounters that used to excite you, only a strange silence spreading over everything. This is the reality many empaths face after abuse. They are not only scarred by the narcissist, but also altered in a quieter, more haunting way. Part of them leaves the other person, but another part seems to leave themselves. Carl Jung believed this is not a collapse, but a necessary stage in individuation. He called it the pain of awakening, the moment when the social mask no longer shields you, and you are forced to face your own shadow. For empaths, this is when they realize love cannot save someone who refuses to be saved, that validation from others cannot sustain their worth, and that the identity of the healer is no longer enough to keep them alive inside. This feeling is both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because you become like a cracked mirror, the reflection no longer whole, the past shattered into fragments. Liberating because through those cracks, light can finally break in for the first time. Many empaths describe how they no longer smile so easily, endure endlessly, and it makes them feel lost. But for Jung, this is the threshold where a new self begins to form. Not the victim anymore, but a being far harder to move, far harder to control. In this video, you will see why this so-called disappearance is not an ending, but a doorway. It is the final stage of an empath after abuse, what Jung called sovereignty, the moment you reclaim your own authority, and from there, no one will ever be able to manipulate you again. The deepest wound for an empath isn't the past abuse. It's the quiet terror of not recognizing who they are anymore. Inside that relationship, they had lived orbiting someone else's emotions, reading every flicker in the eyes, extinguishing anger before it erupted, filling silence with unconditional care. Their body became a radar, constantly scanning to keep a fragile balance. But once the abuse ends, that entire system collapses. There is no one left to please, no distorted mirror to reflect them. Suddenly, there is only a vast emptiness, a loss of direction that feels impossible to fill. In everyday life, this emptiness is impossible to hide. An empath may sit in the middle of a party, surrounded by laughter and chatter, yet feel more hollow than ever. They can show up at work, fulfill every responsibility, and still find success meaningless. They scroll through social media, see promises of love and happiness, but instead of hope, they only feel estranged. This emptiness is not because they have stopped loving. It is because the old mechanism, living by rescuing others, has shattered. Carl Jung called this stage the pain of awakening. The persona, the mask that once secured acceptance, that once allowed them to survive in a toxic bond, now becomes unbearable. Every forced smile, every yes, when the heart screams no, the body reacts as if betrayed. Shoulders stiffen, heartbeat races, breath shortens. There may no longer be an abuser outside, but within, something has begun to revolt. Consciousness refuses to let them go back to pretending. This is not weakness. This is a signal. Awareness has opened, and it cannot be closed again. Many empaths at this stage fall into anxiety or depression. They whisper to themselves, "Am I broken? Have I lost the ability to love?" But the truth is, they have not lost love. They are learning a new form of it. No longer a love exploited to keep abuse alive, but a love that begins in wholeness, Society may label them cold, distant, even unfeeling. But in truth, this is the first step out of the spiral of living for others, the first step back to themselves. If you have felt these symptoms, the exhaustion after every social encounter, the unease of smiling when you don't want to, the emptiness even in a crowded room, know this: you are not alone. And what you're feeling is only the surface of a much deeper process. Jung shows us why this unraveling is necessary, and how from the ruins, a new self is born. Stay with me, because in the next part, we'll open a lens that will show you the true meaning of what you are going through. Carl Jung once said, "We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." For an empath after abuse, this is not just philosophy, it is lived experience. Because when you finally break free from the grip of the narcissist, what remains is not only painful memories, but a vault of shadow that is seeped deep inside. Distorted beliefs, unconscious reflexes, and parts of yourself you never dared to look at directly. And it is precisely in this moment of confrontation that the real journey of awakening begins. Jung described two vital parts of the psyche: the persona and the self. Persona is the social mask, the role you wore to survive in the toxic relationship. Always patient, always forgiving, always putting the other above yourself. Self is the true essence, the part that holds clarity, intuition, and also the unaccepted shadows. In abuse, the persona is exploited until exhaustion, while the self is suppressed, abandoned. But once the relationship ends, every mask collapses, forcing you to face the truth. You have neglected yourself for far too long. This is why many empaths feel more pain after leaving. They are no longer occupied with pleasing someone else. Instead, they are left to sit with themselves, with loneliness, with anger, with disorientation. Yet Jung insisted this is not a collapse, but a necessary stage of individuation, the process of becoming whole. To mature psychologically, you must integrate both light and dark. You must admit that your unconditional love was once exploited, that you too have anger and the need to be protected, that you are not just a healer, but a full human being with boundaries and strength. Think about it. If before you believed love can heal everything, now, through experience, you see that love cannot save someone who does not want to be saved. If before you lived for validation, now you realize that true validation can only come from within. This is the pain of awakening. When old illusions dissolve, so a deeper truth can be born. And if you feel these words echo your own journey, I invite you to subscribe and stay. Every day, we will share more insights from Jung and depth psychology, so you have the language to name your experience and the strength to keep going. Thank you for being here. Your presence itself is proof that no one has to walk through the dark alone. Jung warned that if the shadow is not integrated, it will return to control you from behind. But when you dare to face it, even befriend it, that very shadow becomes your source of strength. And this is the first step for the empath to no longer remain a victim, but to emerge as an entirely new kind of human being. Jung believed that when an empath escapes abuse, they do not simply leave a relationship. They are pushed into a very particular unconscious mechanism, a dissolution that precedes rebirth. This mechanism is not a choice, but the psyche's natural response when driven to its limits. And to understand why so many empaths change so completely after this passage, we have to look at three inner layers of operation. Three silent deaths, the shadow loop, and the archetype of the hermit. The first death is the death of the ego fed by validation. Inside abuse, an empath often builds self-worth on pleasing someone else. Every compliment feels like proof of meaning. Every silence or punishment triggers panic. But once the abuse ends, they are forced to see that such validation was never stable. The old ego, kept alive by the gaze of others, collapses. And painful as it is, this collapse creates the first chance to learn how to source value from within. The second death is the death of the belief that love can save everything. Empaths often trust that patience and unconditional care can reach anyone, even those most deeply wounded. But in the face of narcissism, they collide with a stark truth. Love cannot save someone who does not want to be saved. It is a bitter moment, because it demands the surrender of the most beautiful illusion they ever carried. The third death is the death of the need to identify with the image of the healer. In abuse, they fuse themselves to the role of giver, rescuer, keeper of the flame. When that role breaks, they feel as if they themselves disappear. Yet out of that loss, a space opens. A space where the true self can finally speak. After these three deaths, an unconscious loop often appears. Jung called it the projection of the shadow. When a person has not integrated their shadow, they try to hurl it outward and become entangled in the shadow of others. Empaths after abuse frequently fall into this pattern. Either they keep attracting narcissistic personalities, or they sink into cycles of blame and resentment. This is a protective reflex, but if it continues, it keeps them stuck and unable to mature. Jung insisted that only when projection stops can the shadow be integrated, and only then does the shadow become a source of strength rather than a burden. The final mechanism is the archetype of the hermit. The hermit appears in the unconscious as a collective image, the one who steps back from the noisy world to nourish the inner life. After abuse, many empaths live out this image precisely. They show up less. They retreat from social media. They avoid certain gatherings. They spend long stretches in silence. From the outside, it can look like loneliness, even collapse. But in Jung's view, this phase is necessary. The hermit does not vanish forever. The hermit retreats into the dark only to prepare for a return with a stronger, clearer consciousness. This is why Jung called the whole process a kind of psychic surgery. An empath after abuse must die 3 times in silence, must face the looping compulsion to project, and must accept a period of hermit-like withdrawal. And yet, it is precisely these unconscious layers, when understood and passed through, that lead them into a new stage of life, a place where they no longer live to please or to save, but to truly be present. Imagine a mirror that has hung on the wall for years. Day after day, it reflects your face, and you come to believe that what you see is who you are. But then, one day, a crack appears. At first, it is only a faint line, but slowly it spreads, splitting the glass into warped fragments. Now, when you look into it, you no longer see a whole face, but dozens of broken pieces. This is what it feels like for an empath after abuse, no longer recognizing themselves, trusting what once felt certain. The cracked mirror carries 3 qualities. First, it distorts. Just as when you try to look into yourself after abuse, every memory, every word, every glance is bent out of shape. You find yourself asking, was it my fault? Was all of this because of me? Second, it wounds easily. A simple touch can cut your skin, just as a careless remark can reopen the entire wound. And third, it can never return to what it was. Even if you glue the pieces back together, the fracture remains, reminding you that this mirror once broke. But Jung would say, it is the crack itself that creates the opening. Through those lines, light slips in. When the mirror was whole, it could only reflect the old image. When the mirror shatters, every fragment becomes a new surface, reflecting angles never seen before. For the empath, those cracks force them to confront what they had long avoided, the anger that was suppressed, the need to be protected, the terror of abandonment. All of its surfaces, no longer hidden beneath the polished shine of persona. The broken mirror is also a test. You can stand there endlessly, trying to piece it back as it once was, longing to return to who you used to be. But the more you try, the more impossible it becomes. Or you can do something else. Accept the crack and allow the fragments to assemble into a new form. It will not look the same, but in that difference lies truth. Now, you no longer reflect so others can see themselves in you. You reflect so you can see more clearly who is truly inside. This metaphor speaks not only of pain, but of rebirth. An unbroken mirror shows you a single image. A broken mirror shows you many at once. And if you dare to keep looking, you realize they do not cancel each other out. You are the one who once loved without condition, the one who once burned with anger, and the one now learning to stand firm again. And it is this multiplicity that makes you real. So, if you find yourself staring into this cracked mirror, don't rush into fear. It is not an ending. It is a reminder that it is time to stop chasing an old, perfect reflection and start living with the layered truth of who you are. Because sometimes, only when the mirror has shattered, do you finally see clearly the person who has always been there. If you have ever lived through abuse, you might recognize this feeling. You stand before the mirror, but you're no longer sure the person looking back is you. One part of you is still conditioned to smile, so others won't worry, to nod, to keep the peace, to do anything to avoid conflict. But another part rebels with force. Your body tightens, your chest grows heavy, and you know that one more act of pretending would be enough to break you. This is what Jung called the personal mirror, the moment you are forced to face directly the truth that the old way of living is no longer possible. In daily life, this mirror shows itself more often than you realize. A simple request from a coworker leaves you drained, not because the task is difficult, but because you know you've fallen into the old reflex of, I can't say no. A casual gathering with friends leaves you exhausted, not because you don't care for them, but because you spent the entire night laughing on cue and going along. Even in new relationships, you notice how quickly panic rises when the other person falls silent for too long, as if the old ghosts are still dictating your reactions in the present. If you don't recognize this mirror, you will continue replaying the same loop, finding new narcissists to reflect you to yourself, only to be wounded again. Jung warned of this. The unconscious, if not integrated, always returns as fate. And the fate of many empaths is to be drawn into those who exploit their goodness over and over again. But the personal mirror is also an opening. If you dare to look, you begin to see what you once buried, the anger that was never allowed, the need for protection you once dismissed as selfish, the desire to be loved without paying a price. When these truths appear, you are no longer just a helpless victim. You are someone who now has a choice. You can keep pretending and lose yourself, or you can learn to set boundaries and stay loyal to your inner truth. The difficulty is that society rarely welcomes this change. People grow comfortable with you as the unconditional giver, and the moment you start saying no, they may call you cold, distant, or even selfish. But the psychological mirror does not lie. It reflects the exhaustion that follows every forced smile, and it reflects the light each time you dare to choose what is real for you. So if you are standing before that mirror now, pay attention. The reflection may look unfamiliar, but it is you, not the distorted version twisted by abuse, but the self slowly forming through the cracks. And it is precisely when you dare to hold that gaze without looking away that you begin to reclaim the authorship of your own journey. When an empath walks out of abuse, what traps them the longest is not the memory, but the old language they use to name themselves. They are used to thinking of themselves as too sensitive, not strong enough, or the one who always forgives. These labels once helped them survive, but after the rupture, they became shackles. Jung once wrote, "The language we use shapes the way we live our darkness." Which means, if you continue narrating yourself with the same old words, you will remain chained to the same old cycle. This is why reframing is not optional, but necessary. Instead of calling your withdrawal loneliness, call it space to be reborn. Instead of labeling your anger as weakness, recognize it as protective energy rising from yourself. Instead of believing you no longer love as before, acknowledge that you are learning to love again, this time not through sacrifice, but through wholeness. A new language does more than change your thoughts. It changes the very mechanics of your psyche. When you tell yourself, "I am reclaiming my psychological boundaries," instead of "I am losing everyone," the entire inner atmosphere shifts. Jung observed that after abuse, empaths tend to split into 4 types. The dissolved one, who loses all sense of self. The armored one, who closes off and distrusts everyone. The wounded healer, who keeps trying to mend others as a way to patch their own cracks. And the rarest of all, the sovereign empath, the one who becomes self-governing, who still loves, but is no longer manipulated. The difference lies in the language they use to interpret their experience. Those who keep saying, "I'm broken," stay dissolved. Those who say, "I must fight the whole world," remain in armor. Only those who dare to shift their frame to, "I am learning to stay loyal to my inner truth," ever move towards sovereignty. But reframing is not wordplay. It is a choice about which story you will live. If you call this chapter "The End," your psyche will react as though everything has been lost. If you call it transformation, your psyche will give you energy to step forward. This is the power of renaming. And once you can do it, even the most painful experiences begin to change color. They are no longer meaningless wounds, but carved lessons about limits, clarity, and the right to protect yourself. Yet hidden inside this process is a trap. Jung warned, if you do not reframe in time, the collective unconscious will do it for you. It will whisper that you are a failure, that you have grown cold, that you have lost your worth because you no longer give endlessly as you once did. And if you believe those whispers, you will be pulled back into the same spiral again and again. Here is the crucial warning. If you do not dare to reframe, you will remain imprisoned inside definitions that were never yours. You will live under labels like too sensitive, too fragile, until you become nothing more than the shadow abuse left behind. And that is the true cost. Not the loss of other people, but the loss of your one chance to become sovereign, the free version of yourself that you were always meant to live. Jung never stopped at analysis. He always reminded us that if the shadow is only understood by reason, it will quickly return to rule you. The only way through is practice, small daily actions that turn awakening into a way of life. For empaths after abuse, there are 4 simple but essential steps. Step 1 is to acknowledge the shadow. Whenever you feel anger, envy, or hurt, don't rush to dismiss it. Write it down. Call it by its name. The moment you place language onto emotion, you pull it out of the unconscious and into the light. Step 2 is to withdraw, projection. When you find yourself absorbed in someone else's story, pause and ask, is this their emotion or mine? By stopping long enough to ask, you separate yourself from the spiral of the unconscious. Step 3 is to train boundaries. Instead of giving by reflex, practice saying no in the smallest situations. Decline a request you don't need to fulfill. Turn off your phone when you're drained. Each act of refusal rebuilds the borders of yourself. Step 4 is to align with a positive archetype. Find a symbol or image that gives you strength. A candle flame, a great tree, or even the image of the mirror restored. Each time you falter, return to that symbol as a reminder that you are moving through a process larger than yourself. You don't need to change the entire world in one day. Just these 4 small steps, repeated long enough, will show you something undeniable. You are no longer the victim of abuse, but a self that is slowly becoming sovereign, clear, and unshakable. The cost of not changing after abuse is not just the old pain, but the endless repetition. If you keep living in the old language, you will find yourself drawn back to the same types of people: the manipulator, the taker, the one who needs you only as a mirror for their own reflection. Each time, the wound cuts deeper until your psyche begins to accept the lie that you were born only to be a crutch for others. The long-term consequence is the erosion of your ability to recognize the self, the very sensitivity that was once your gift, becoming a burden. Jung called this the tragedy of the unconscious. When the shadow is not integrated, it turns into fate. And the fate of many empaths is to become a puppet in someone else's script, repeating it until they collapse. But when you dare to change, the picture is entirely different. An empath, stepping into the sovereign stage, no longer lives to please anyone. They still feel deeply, but they know where the boundaries lie. They still give, but no longer sacrifice themselves just to be loved. They can love, but also stop when a relationship begins to suffocate them. This is the quality Jung described as individuation, a human being who has touched their shadow and also connected with their light. No longer extreme in giving everything, nor extreme in building a wall of ice. They become whole, both gentle and unshakable. The closing philosophy here is this: the disappearance that many see in empaths after abuse is not a loss, but a form of evolution. They disappear from meaningless conversations, from toxic loops, only to reappear in a different form, clear, truthful, and resistant to manipulation. This is the pain of awakening. You lose an old world, but in return, you gain loyalty to your real self. Jung once wrote, "Whoever looks outside dreams, whoever looks inside awakens." After abuse, the empath has no choice but to look inward, no matter how painful. Yet it is that gaze that carries them to a place where no one can easily control them again. And that is the destination of this journey, from a cracked mirror into a new one, not reflecting to please anyone, but reflecting a truth that cannot be distorted. If you are in this process now, remember, the cost of not changing is to remain trapped in someone else's shadow. But the reward for stepping forward is a freedom that nothing can take from you. And once you touch that freedom, it is yours forever. Imagine stepping out of a house that is burned to the ground. Smoke still lingers in your hair, and the scent of ash clings to your clothes. You turn back and see nothing but charred walls, where once there were objects, memories, laughter. A part of you wants to go back, to salvage whatever is left. But then you realize some things were consumed by the fire, and clinging to them will only burn your hands again. The only path forward is to walk away. The disappearance of an empath after abuse feels the same. You don't disappear because you are weak. You disappear because the old house has collapsed, and you cannot live among ashes forever. The moment you turn your back is not an escape. It is the opening of a new existence, where yourself is no longer hidden, where love no longer means endless sacrifice. No one promises that walking away will be easy, but you can begin with something very small. Give yourself one day not to please anyone else, but simply to listen to what you want. It could be writing down a single line, sitting quietly in silence, or saying no to something you know would drain you. These small acts are the first bricks in building a new home. If you feel these words echo in your own journey, I invite you to stay connected here. Together we will uncover more pieces from Jung and depth psychology, not only to understand your pain, but to transform it into a quiet kind of freedom. And sometimes, that very silence becomes the most powerful declaration you will ever make.